All right, so good afternoon. Welcome, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Tomas Santamaria. I'm assistant professor at the Business Sustainability Center at Universidad, Desarrollo in Chile. It's a pleasure to welcome you to our webinar titled Looking to the Future, Reflections and Opportunities for Latin America after COP-30. It's great to already see some colleagues and familiar faces from across Latin America and a couple beyond Latin America. So happy to see you guys here. So today events, just as a setting up the stage, builds on on discussions and group and a community we started building early this year during the Academy of Management, where we had a sustainability management research in Latin America, a professional development workshop. So many of you already on the webinar were part of it, so happy to see you guys here. And one of the key things we realized in this conversation is one, that there's a growing community of scholars working on sustainability management and related topics, but we rarely collaborate. So we set the goal to do different activities to create this community. And this is one of these activities, one of the first activities we do as to build this emerging Latin American sustainability research community. Yeah, this is actually a picture of the webinar we had last year. And at the bottom right, we are sharing here a QR code, and we're going to share it also at the end of the webinar, inviting you to also put your name there and invite you to join this community of sustainability scholars across Latin America. But as I said, we're going to share this link again at the end. All right, so before we start, let me just give you a very, very brief stage setting regarding COP, which is the main topic of our webinar. So COP meetings, or Conference of the Parties, are the annual UN climate summit where countries meet and review their global progress, update their climate commitments, and negotiate collective action towards meeting the Paris Agreement. These meetings really guide the direction of global climate over the coming years. And this year we had the great opportunity to have it close to home here in Latin America. It was in Belém, in Brazil, right at the entrance of the Amazon, a region that is vital for climate stability, biodiversity, and indigenous livelihoods. And also another aspect that made this COP very important, very relevant, is that it was a moment where all countries were expected to update their nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. This created high expectations for more ambitious commitment, greater regional cooperation, and stronger alignment for the Paris Agreement. So we want to hear from our panelists how does that felt in first person, because they had the opportunity to be there. So let me, before we start with the question, just very quickly introduce you to our two panelists. First, we have Gustavo Loiola, who serves as a representative of the Brazilian delegation at COP-30. Gustavo is a professor, speaker, and sustainability specialist with extensive experience in education, consulting, and leading organizational transformation projects. He's also a PhD candidate in operations and sustainability management at the Sao Paulo School of Business Administration. So Gustavo, thanks a lot for joining us today. And second, we have Dr. Alex Godoy, who participated in COP-30 and also in a few of the previous COPs, also as a member of Chile's Scientific Advisory Committee on Climate Change for the Ministry of Environment. Alex is also an associate professor at the engineering school at Universidad, Desarrollo, and he's the director of the Sustainability and Strategic Research Management Research Center at the School of Engineering. So Alex, also we're very pleased to have you here today. In this conversation, how is this going to work? First, I'm going to be facilitating. We have a couple of questions prepared for our panelists. We're going to be discussing three main topics. First, reflections on the outcomes of COP-30. In second place, what are the implications for Latin America? And in third place, what I'm very intrigued to hear about is what are the implications for academic research and for academic collaboration within Latin America of COP-30? Um, After this conversation, we'll open the floor for questions from the audience. And you are more than welcome to start already using the chat to put your comments, put your questions. We have right here Angel Seville, who is also part of the Business Sustainability Center and a professor at UDD. He will be moderating the chat and collecting your questions to help us have a very smooth Q&A session at the end. So with those instructions and preparation in mind, we would like to start the fun part, the questions. So I'm gonna stop sharing. For those who got here late, we're also recording the meeting. We are planning on also sharing this content in social media later. So just so you're aware of it. All right, awesome. Let me get my copy here. Okay, so I would like to start with Gustavo. So based on your recent experience participating in COP-30, what would you highlight as the most significant results or agreements achieved during this conference? And also, as a complement to this question is, to what extent do you think these outcomes met the expectations set for this edition? So, to you.
Great. Thanks, Thomas. Thanks for this space and for the invitation to join this session. And really happy to speak a little bit about COP, especially this COP that happened in Brazil, my home country. So it was really great to have such a big conference, big discussion happening around here. And even for me as Brazilian, I'm based in the south and based in Curitiba. Going to Belém was a way different experience, a different Brazil that was also new for me in different ways. So I think this is one thing that I would highlight, like having the COP on the Amazon region in a city like Belém, that is really important for Brazil history. Was a really important mark of this year, and but overall, in general, what I would like to say is that one, I'm um, I'm happy with the conference despite all the frustration that we had during the agreements and so on. I think again, having COP in the Amazon, it was the first COP that we have made a strong participation of indigenous people. So we had about 2,000 indigenous people participating as registered participants and officially engaged on the conference. Of course, they're all around the different spaces that the city provided and other areas that we're hosting similar discussions. So bringing this voice to the conversation in different levels was really important, I think. And of course, this was also reflected in some of the outputs of the conference that, for example, in some documents mention a lot of about indigenous rights or Afro-descendant people, like the impact that the climate may have in this kind of populations, the justice of recognizing their importance, the impacts that the discussions related to climate and so on also have in their lives. So this social piece of the conference, I think, was really important and something to be highlighted, and also having this like such a discussion having a space on the table for the conversation, like indigenous voice and underrepresented people and so on. Um, of course, we got frustrated in some ways, especially when we talk about the phase out of fossil fuels, the mention about this topic on the negotiations and so on. I think the conference was really framed as the implementation COP, the COP of implementation. So the bar was really high on that space. But we know that a space like COP, it's really hard to arrive in a common sense because it's a negotiation space. So you're there like fighting for language, fighting for words, fighting for marks in the documents to accept, and so on. So it's a lot of comes and goes. But I think beyond that, my perspective is what stays beyond the conference itself. Especially following, I've been following the last few COPs and uh, looking to the last year, 1 year from now, what happened here in Brazil, and Brazilian ecosystem, and also in Latin America, was really important to position ourselves in the global conversation about this. Brazil, for example, in November last year, we hosted the G20 conference that had a lot of conversations about climate change, biodiversity laws, and financial models to look to that. So this already started that time. And all over the year, I think COP presidency and all the actors involved to that worked a lot to build this ecosystem of discussion that culminated in the conversations that we had at COP. And of course, we follow the conversations until the next COP that is also under Brazilian presidency. So I think the legacy of the conference, for me, it's really important. Like making people talking about the issue, like the financial models to doing that, to the transition, the voice of indigenous people, the people's participation on COP, like the society itself being there engaged. I think this is part of the highlights that I would bring to this discussion to start.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that overview and your insights. So to you, Alex, do you share a similar perspective? What would you highlight as the most significant results and if they met expectations or not?
Um, yes, and apologize because my English is not so good. In my native language is Spanish. Yeah, it's a very good question because I feel very, very frustrated. I have too many hats that you know, Thomas, and I am a member of the IPCC, and I was member bringing advice for the Ministry of Treasure and for Paris Agreement in 2015. Until today, always I am being related to the COPs and for the Chilean delegates bringing advice. And right now, I was there like member of the scientific committee on climate change. And I am very critical of that COP because, putting in context, I agree with Gustavo, and the expectation about that COP was huge. Why? Because in Brazil, always has been, one of the big countries, member of the BRICS, and pushing for put on the table and issues like biodiversity and conservation of forestry and so on. So indeed, the idea to propose to Belém there was under the rationale that we are going to the Amazonia in order that provide the insights and the environment that the negotiator can understand what we are talking about, because too many people is talking about the conservation, rehabilitation about the Amazonia, but nobody was there. Nobody was visiting the Amazonia yet. So that was the idea. But okay, the main goal of the Conference of Parties is the greenhouse emissions. And right now, we couldn't to put into the text more pressure to different countries in order to reduce the greenhouse emissions. The phase out of fossil fuel oils, was a big issue. And my perception that the behavior and attitude of the Brazilian delegation was very mixed, because for one side, they put the indigenous and local knowledge on the table. What is the relevance of that? But for another side, the Minister of the Economy and Minister of the Foreign Affairs never want to talk about for example, extraction of the fuel oils or the deforestation of the Amazonia. So that was not clear for the rest of Latin America, GRULAC on ILAC, how we can negotiate in order to try to deal something against of the global north. That's the truth. On the way, and too many people say we cannot understand what is the Brazilian position, because the expectation was huge. Huge, really huge. Right now, the presidency of the ILAC is the negotiation group in Latin American, and was Colombia, and always was Colombia putting pressure in the biodiversity and so on. So what was my perception? My perception was the presidency of the COPs, and was very, how you say in English, Tomás, dubitativo. It's like was not clear about some specific position against all the fuel oils, or, for example, and for biodiversity and so on. This is because finally, the one of the main outcomes is the protection of the indigenous and local knowledge. But honestly, that it's a soft policy, no hard policy. The hard policy is how we can reduce or phase out of the fuel oils. That was the more critical things. Indeed, what was successful there? One, we have a very, very clear mechanism about the Article 6, about the ETS, the emission trade systems. Right now, we have the rules, we have the indicators, and we are moving ahead in a global market, maybe trading and carbon credits, for example. And we fix, for example, if you are and capturing that and carbon dioxide here, how you can sell in another kind of market, for example. Until right now, just we have an experimental market like for Switzerland, Chile, Japan, and so on. But right now we are moving ahead in a global carbon market. That is a very good news, because the private companies maybe right now have the rules in order to understand how we can invest your money in natural capital that you are working in your center, Tomás and Angel. And how much money you can invest in the reforestation or afforestation as well. So this is very, very good, because right now we have a very clear rules about that kind of mechanism. And about the indigenous and local knowledge, perfect, because right now we know what is the relevance in order to try to get that kind of knowledge in order to move and in adaptation pathways, because we know that the local knowledge and indigenous knowledge is very useful in order to try to deploy too many strategies, working with local communities, and maybe scale up that kind of knowledge in order to apply, for example, that kind of the approaches like natural capital or nature-based solutions in another kind of industry. For example, agriculture and regenerative agriculture is always including the local knowledge, for example, in order to try to keep the crops stable for the time. The big fails, okay, and the big fail is nobody talk about the phase out of the fuel oils. And the text was very flexible and clear and light. And that's where we feel very frustrated. Why? Because in the next year, we'll have the global stocktake. And the global stocktake is the cake of the greenhouse emissions. So we need to try to define everything about the indicators and so on. So what is more unclear about adaptation? Because always the African group and the South American group was fighting in order to put pressure on the global north to put more money into the adaptation pathways. We have more money, but despite of we are agree in 60 adaptation and in indicators for adaptation metrics, we don't know what kind of rules we have in any indicators. We don't have any standards. We don't know nothing about how we are going to compare, for example, the vulnerability of Africa and Latin America. So we have money, but we don't have the structure and methodology in order to allocate that funding in different kind of countries. Right now, we cannot to compare and do the benchmark between, for example, Mozambique against Colombia. So the question is, how much money one country could be get according to the funding? What is the vulnerability of the Chile? We don't know nothing about. So that kind of gaps is not useful for the next COP, because right now, if we want to allocate money, we need to fix the rules, fix the standards, and fix the indicators on the metrics in order to try to and correlate the vulnerability, money that the country needs, and maybe what kind of infrastructure they need to invest. So was because that COP was very unclear. It was unfair, or maybe was not. We were not advancing for the next COP because we couldn't to reduce the gap. We couldn't to increase the ambition. We are protecting the indigenous people and the forest and the reforestation, but we don't know how we can put money on them. So we have money, but we cannot to allocate to them. We are moving to reduce greenhouse emissions, but we are not increasing the ambitions. Nobody's talking about the new extraction of the fuel oils in Latin America and the Caribbean. Nobody was talking about the countries against of that COPs, for example, Saudi Arabia and other ones. And Europe doesn't want to put more money because they feel that the most important things for them is Africa, not Latin America. So, in my opinion, it's a mixed feelings. This is because I feel frustrated because we didn't win, but we didn't lose. For Latin America, in my opinion, was a big failure because Brazil is one of the most representative countries of the Latin America and the Caribbean. So we had the chance to lead that process, and we lost that chance. That's my feeling. We need to wait. The next COP will be in Turkey. Turkey is a complicated country because in the geopolitical position of the Turkey is sometimes bring support to the Arabian countries, and sometimes he's supporting to the European countries. We don't know what could be the political position for the next COP, but the presidency of the COP will be under Australian government. And we know that was the position of the Australian government. Sometimes they are green, and sometimes they're protecting the fuel oils. So maybe I am not optimistic. We need to be very pragmatic, and maybe we need to try to move ahead in trying to fix the rules for small groups. Like in international theory, the name is minilateralism. Is a small group of countries fixing the rules by maybe managing the demand. For example, increasing the standards. That's my perception. The next step is 80 countries, including Chile, Brazil, and other ones, is trying how we can fix the standards in order to increase the regulation and reduce the greenhouse emission production, fuel oil production, in order to increase the standards and maybe putting pressure into that countries. So is in Spanish is gestión de la demanda, is and managing the demand. This is this is the same for the plastic and biodiversity.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex, for your view, and thank you for already talking about what do you see as the next challenges. So I would like to also follow up with that to Gustavo. So looking ahead, what do you see as the next key steps following COP-30, both globally but also for Latin America? Is there what's the key role we expect to play here? What are maybe the key areas that needs to be a priority from now to the next COP, but also in the longer term?
Yeah. Well, I think I would like to bring a perspective from the private sector itself, like how the discussions and negotiations also impacts the private sector and the financing ecosystem and the financing market on that space, because of course it's important, for example, attract money from countries, from developed countries for like meeting the targets and the needs that we want related to the decarbonization or the biodiversity protection and so on. But I think one of the challenges is also to attract private capital to that discussions, because of course we don't live in a lack of resources, of financial resource. The money is around there, but we need to connect and to align this money to follow the solutions that we need to build. So I think one of the challenge that we see as next steps is really how to integrate and combine different kinds of capital to work towards the solutions and the transition that we need to push. And for that there's the challenge it's also big because in a way, for example, we need to evolve a lot, and the financing ecosystem, how to combine public investment with private investment, how to manage and to deal with the international help or international money from sovereign funds for governments and so on, how to mobilize and to articulate those international funds that are being discussed during COP and so on. So I think our financing mechanisms also need to evolve on that space. But on the other hand, I think that we are moving forward to that. I think Latin America in the past few years worked a lot in taxonomy development for financing. Countries like Mexico and Colombia and Brazil just launched the taxonomy this September, to help to discuss about like sustainable finance, like in impact finance, and how to work with those different mechanisms. So I think we're moving to that. But it's something new. We need to make this money flow in the proper way, like making this money arrive in the right people in the communities and those who are doing the change and making the difference. So we can balance and make and work on this fair transition. So I think this is the immediate next steps. But looking to, for example, I start talking about the private sector. For example, nowadays, about 6% of the financial amount that is going to decarbonization solutions, for example, comes from private sector. So like because they're seeing this as a business opportunity, let's say that, like investing in energy transition, investing, let's say, in solar panels, investing and so on. It's a business opportunity itself. So I think we need to work to bring also opportunities for other issues that we face, like biodiversity, like bioeconomy, and the social inequalities, and so on. So I think this is where we are right now. And I think and tend to agree on what Alex said about the role of Brazil, and this was really present also in different discussions, and I think it's it's clear, but it's not clear, this protagonist, because in a way, for example, we have the government saying that, well, for example, the exploring oil in the Amazon like region, like Brazil is like approving to make this exploitation around there, and so on. And then the government say, well, this brings lots of resources, financial resources that can help the country itself, that can help to solve many issues that the country have, and then can even also support the energy investing in energy transition and so on in the country. But in the other way, in the same year that we're hosting COP in the Amazon, we are approving like a project to allow to explore oil in the Amazon region. So it's kind of antagonical views. But I think despite that, one of the roles that we need to play, the roles that we need to play is really demonstrating the value of the solutions that we may have in the region, like in making the forest, for example, alive, and how can we combine indigenous knowledge with innovative solutions, with like biodiversity, bioeconomy. How can we reinforce that? How can we increase those kind of solutions in the region? Because I think this will be the new frontier of investment, like solutions that are looking to that. Colombia also hosted the COP of biodiversity in October this year. That it was also present, like the financial mechanisms to support biodiversity and so on. So I think this is the to resume, this is the immediate challenge in my way, in my vision, like how to make the money flow in a proper way, in a fair way, how to reinvent and to rethink in all the financial mechanisms that we have in place, and how do we attract more and more private capital to fill the financial gap that we have and to go to the solutions. How do we combine that and how do we make this work? So I think this is something like beyond the negotiation levels that we have, the challenge that Alex already mentioned. How can we make things work in the economy itself?
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. Very nice insight. I would like to
Yeah,
take some of this.
I,
Oh,
I, I would
yeah.
like to
Yes.
reinforce that Gustavo said, because you know, right now we have an adaptation and 60 indicators for adaptation, and right now the role of the private sector will be key for the next COP, because the governments and the countries just we are putting the regulation, but finally it's the private sector who's using them for and trying to deal different kind of things, or address the investor role. But Gustavo say is clear. I think the role of the private sector will be key for the next COP, because finally, who is doing who is doing the action? The private sector. Finally, and who is going to work with indigenous people? The private sector, not the government. The government is just fixing the rules. Finally, is the private sector with companies and industry in different kind of the in different part of the territory who is dealing with the local communities, and the responsibility of the private sector is huge every time. So in that case, I think we have a very huge chance of the private sector to mobilize that finance in order to invest locally, trying to get the profits globally, and maybe trying to be the accelerate the catalyst, to do the finance. And right now, what is the problem? We have money. The green climate funds, they have a lot of money to invest, but we don't have projects. Gustavo, you saw in COP right now, the people in the World Bank, in the green climate funds, they are looking for more projects, and the governments, they are not they is not the right actor to propose something. Who is proposing the projects? The private sector, the companies, and in working with the local communities in order to try to deploy that kind of approach technology there. So if you ask me, Tomas, honestly, I think this is a very good chance to involve the private sector in order to deploy the different kind of technologies, approaches with the local communities, and indeed maybe fixing the standards as well. Remember the green the metrics of the greenhouse emissions, no, the carbon footprint was and private and public and work finally dealing, and how we can are going to assess the scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And right now is the private sector who is moving to the scope 4. So honestly, I think right now the role of the government is fix the rules in order to reduce the uncertainty for the future. And finally, the private sector and companies and the local communities are the key actor in order to mobilize the funding in order to deploy the proper technologies and approaches locally.
Mhm. Awesome. Yeah, very good compliment. All right. So far we've discussed mostly the role of both governments and the private sector. But most of the people in this webinar and in the invitation and in the community are sustainability scholars, right? So researchers and academics. So I would love to hear your perspective on what is the role of universities and research in this challenging context, right? So what are the implications of the outcomes of COP-30 for academic research and education? Maybe we can start with Gustavo.
Of course. Well, I think I will bring the perspective from the disciplines that are closer to it, like operation management and strategy, business strategy, and so on. I think there's a lot of opportunities in different levels. One, when we look, for example, to the point that I was just mentioned about the financing mechanisms, the instruments, the ways to how to manage the capital flow and so on. So I think this is a good spot to investigation because, well, it's a I will not say that it's a new discussion, but it's a growing discussion in how to move, how to make the capital flow, and all the implications that this will bring. How to assess that, how to evaluate that, how to look to that, how to manage that, how to combine financial impact with environmental impact, with social impact, and so on. So I would say that this kind of discussions and intersection would be a good research opportunity, especially in the business or in the economics or business administration research field. I think this is a good approach. Also, the company's adaptation to meet those standards and those regulations, because as we know, in the past few years, companies, they committed a lot to decarbonize their operations, their supply chains, the way that they do business, and so on. And to do that, they need to adapt and they need to change the way that they do business. And of course, following what's happening, especially the hard disconnection between walk and talk, all the greenwashing cases and so on. And during this COP, we saw the major private sector participation over there, everyone presenting the beautiful things that they're doing, how they are saving the world, and so on. But like in some cases, there's also a lack in practice, like what they are really doing, how they're really changing their operations, how they are investing, let's say, in eco-innovation and circular economy, what they are doing to meet their standards, the targets that they committed, the new regulations on that space. So I think looking to such operations, such transition, is also an interesting field for research and investigation, I guess. So of course, other things that are also related to the extreme climate events, how this also may impact operations, the way that businesses are managed, how this influence also the financing mechanism, financing ecosystems. So I think this is also part on what can we look, and on public policy, I guess. So public policy, economy, climate finance, and so on, how those kind of intersections and interactions happens, like the innovative financing models, the funds, the green bonds, social bonds, and so on, or even the costs of mitigation versus inaction, versus adaptation. So I think this is also under development, and it's something that it's growing. And I think also bring the global south focus or the regional focus is also important. Like major research that we see in decarbonization strategy are looking to let's say the so-called developed countries. So we see a lot of research happening in Europe about this topic, even in US, even also in China. But we don't see a lot happening of research on this field, on this kind of strategy and adaptation from Latin America. So I think this is where we can explore in the following years.
Mhm. Awesome. Yeah. So yeah,
Just
many opportunities. Yeah, I would like to
yeah,
just move to you, Alex. What do you see
just
as
briefly, I think
I-
so, just complementing it in two sentences. I think for the researchers, and we have two challenge. One is change the mindset into the School of Economic and Management or School of Business and into the School of Engineering. That right now we are in transition to a new economy, and that new economy needs new models, new kind of strategies in order to apply that finance, because we cannot use the same and models that we used 40 years ago. For example, the classic financial and assessment. No, we need to change the rationale behind. We need to include, for example, the value of the natural capital. We need to include, for example, the cost for the environmental and outcomes into the projects. We need to move to the valuation of the non-value and goods for normal markets. No, so we need to move ahead in a new, including that issues into the curriculum of the young and the students. because right now we are applying the same tools to assess any project like 40 years ago. That's one. And the second one is the researchers, is we need to use more scientific and methodological approaches, because right now, if we were going to assess the natural capital, or we are going to assess, for example, reforestation, we need to put numbers, and we need to use the science behind. This is for the School of Engineering. We need to try to quantify how much carbon one forest is capturing, and how we can convert in value or in money, and the price, the right price. No, so in that case, we need to move ahead in a new kind of economy. We need to try to find new kind of methodologies, approaches, in order to facilitate the transition. That's my point.
Great. Yeah, very good complement to Gustavo's points. So yeah, definitely many opportunities for academia. We have a big responsibility here. We would like to now move to the audience. We wanted to finish around 4, so in 17 minutes. So Angel, is there any questions from the audience you would like to direct, or maybe you have some backup topics?
And we didn't get any questions yet from the chat, but I would open the microphone and
Open
to
the
the
floor.
audience. If anyone
Open the floor for the
yes,
negotiation. And
I would
Gustavo,
open the floor. If
the
anyone
floor.
has any open question for the speakers, we have some questions now in the chat, and I have some other questions I collected from hearing the speakers, but I would like to give first the opportunity to the audience just to ask loudly.
I see that Sebastiana Arregada, you just posed a question, but maybe if you want to
Yes, we have two questions
loud.
now. I would read the two questions first. The first question is, considering the outcomes of COP-30, how can local, community, and rural innovations, especially in agriculture, water management, and inclusive economies together with private sector initiatives help drive real progress on mitigation and adaptation? So, how can local, community, and rural innovations together with private sector help drive progress on mitigation and adaptation? This is one question.
I can start and kick off with that. I think this is fundamental and essential, and also a huge challenge based on the gap that we just mentioned, because the communities itself, the people that are there in the ground doing solutions that reduce mitigation, adaptation, carbon insetting, and so on. In some cases, like in the majority of cases, I guess, they are not ready to access the capital that is coming. And it's the point of who is in the ground say, well, there's no money for my projects and initiatives, and who are there in the top say, well, there's no project for me to invest. So there's a huge gap between the solutions and the money. And on that, I think not just private sector, but also NGOs or the 2.0 economy and so on, the intermediary organizations plays an important role, like supporting those organizations that are on the ground, those projects and initiatives that are on the ground, to access the capital and the finance and the amount of money that may come, and support us with like technical knowledge, support those initiatives, and really measure their impact and evaluate their impact to attract different types of investment. So I think this is where the challenge is, like how do we combine, how do we connect the solutions that are on the ground with the money, with the investors that are coming. When we talk about the private sector, I think many of those initiatives are also under their value chain. I know, for example, some cases here from Brazil, like companies like Natura, for example, that works with the Amazon region a lot, that do good work in mapping such initiatives and solutions and support those initiatives and solutions to be included in their own value chain, being their part of their um, partners in offering raw materials or offering products and so on, especially because a lot of their cosmetics are from the Amazon-based cosmetics and so on. So they need the communities to access their materials to produce. So I think this is where we need to go. Like the solutions are there on the ground, but we need to fill the gap in connecting the solutions with those who are able to pay or able to invest in the solution. So I think intermediary organizations play an important role on that space.
Just
Okay.
from my side, just briefly, according of the last IPCC assessment report 6 of the IPCC, we have the one problem if the private sector is not addressing the problems properly. What they're trying to say, for example, and the impact of the factories is locally, and sometimes the companies are putting focus on something that is not locally, it's globally. Okay, but the mitigation, the problem of the mitigation is an internal challenge. If you ask me honestly, and with Gustavo, we know that the companies needs to reduce the dependency of the fuel oils, but this is an internal challenge. The external challenge is when you have factories and companies located throughout the territory. The most important thing is trying to assess the risk against of the climate change and what kind of risk they can to alleviate by different kind of strategies or approaches in order to reduce of the vulnerability, in order to reduce the risk against of the one climate hazard. So in that case, the adaptation is with the communities, because finally any actions and deploy it locally have more effect than one project or one an approach in another part of the country. What I'm trying to say, the mitigation is an internal challenge. The adaptation is a local challenge. So in that case, the companies has a lot of the opportunities in order to work with local communities, in order to try to reduce the vulnerability of the local communities against of the climate hazard. So that is the right pathway. Don't expect that the government is going to resolve your problems, because just the government is just fixing the rules. What is the role of the government? Fixing the rules and reduce the uncertainty in order to protect the investment. That's it. And the private sector is looking for certainty all the time in order to try to keep the investment properly. So that is the role of the government, try to reduce the uncertainty for the future. So that's it. So act locally, but thinking globally in order to try to move in mitigation and adaptation as well.
Okay, thank you, Gustavo and Alex, for your answers. We have one question from Sebastian. What political and technical factors prevented reaching a consensus to include clear language and more concrete commitments on the phase out of fossil fuels?
Yeah.
You talked something about this, but maybe we need more detailed explanation about this issue.
Gustavo?
No, go ahead. I think you can kick off on that.
So what is the problem of phase out? No.
Why no comment then? Why there is no comment?
Okay, this is simple, and it's the egg of the chicken. This is the problem. It's like the drugs. What is the problem? The demand of the drugs or the drugs producer? That's it. So, and if you are talking with the people in Saudi Arabia, I had the chance to talk with the president of Aramco in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah, and he said, we are extracting fuel oils, but we are not consuming them. But that's true. If you ask me on drive the demand in order to reduce the demand of the fossil fuels. Why? Because honestly, and I am a green guy. I am against of the fossil fuels. But of course, suppose that if I am Chilean, suppose that in the next COP Someone say Chile needs to reduce and needs to phase out of the copper. What? But when my income depend of the copper production. So nobody wants to feel that in international people or international person or negotiators is fixing the rules against me. The rationale of the negotiator is nobody can put the pressure in order to regulate your production externally. So it's different if we provide the differential pathways for fossil fuel producers, because, for example, Saudi Arabia is completely different of the Emirates and completely different of Egypt. In that case, for example, an Emirate is the most advanced country into the Arabian countries in order that they need to change some structure of the economy in order to move to the phase out. In Saudi Arabia, it's completely different. Right now, if the Saudi Arabia close the door for the fossil fuels, and Saudi Arabia doesn't have nothing to produce, it's the desert. They need to change the country, indeed. So it's not an obligation. We need trying to provide a solution for them too, because finally that countries are part of the world too. We need to understand that, okay, I don't like the fossil fuels, but I need to understand that some countries depend of that kind of productions, and we are not providing any solution for them. So, for example, for Brazil is very clear. If you want to protect Amazonia, if Brazil protect Amazonia, they cannot produce meat, or they cannot other kind of products. It's the alternative cost. My question is, who is willing to pay the cost of the Brazilians for protect the forest? Nobody. So if you want to protect the biodiversity, someone needs to put money for that. That's the truth. So this is because we need to support to Brazil, because Brazil say, this is my Amazonia. You want my forest, you want my meat. Perfect. But if I am protecting the Amazonia, I cannot produce an meat, and I have a lot of the employers and employment depending on the agricultural activities. Who is paying for that? Brazil. So if we want to protect someone, or if we want to protect someone, or we want to move to the phase out, we need to provide the right condition for that kind of countries in order to keep their economy healthy. And nobody's thinking about that. This is my defense of the COP. So right now, what is the one challenge for the future? The support we need to bring for that kind of countries in order to support the change of their economy to another kind of economy. Who is manufacturing, for example, the next generation of the engines? Right now we have electric cars, hybrid cars. Yes, but what happened with the ships? What happened with their airplanes? What happened with the heating engines? That technology is producing in Europe, in China, no in Arabian countries. So that's the dilemma. How we can move and change the technology in order to reduce the demand, and how we can provide the support for another kind of country that depend of that kind of business. 7% of the GDP of the Russia depend of the natural gas. 7%.
Thank you very much, Alex, for this very clear explanation. We have maybe time for one last question. There is one question from Claudia about funding. Yes, summary in the question is, how can we access to the funding? So what is the problem of the funding is not available for using it? So it's a problem about the conventional, about the project logic. It's a problem about that there is no coordination. There is a lack of organizations, intermediate organizations, just to put this money in the places we need it. So, if you can clarify a little bit about the problems of funding, getting into the places where we need it.
I can also start on that. I think my perspective, there are some attempts, I guess, to move in a different direction. One example, it's like the Tropical Forest Forever like facility that tried to move away from, let's say, isolated projects toward like a more predictable multi-decade flow, like in long-term perspective with financial linked outcomes. So let's say the forest standing for a while. So it's not a short cycle for this project, but is to reward countries and communities for a trajectory of conservation. So it's a long-term perspective, not so like a short term. Other example is the Baku Belém roadmap that talks about some country platforms that aligns different sources of financing. So it's bilateral money, private, philanthropic, and so on, around this national strategy and of transition. So it's a kind of a shift from many donors, many projects for something more coordinated and programmatic. So I think it's how we kind of we start to sophisticate this discussion. So for example, the operationalization of the loss and damage fund, there's a growing emphasis in locally led adaptation and just transition, bringing vulnerable countries and communities for this in the front row seat. So looking to their risks, their priorities, and not just donor branding. So I think this is like all the attentions to solve these issues, like to fill the gaps, to make the money flow in a proper way, to change the way that we evaluate progress, to change the way that we focus in solutions. So I think it's where we're going. So being honest, I think the dominant ecosystem still reproduce what is convention, this convention project logic, in short term, like in 3 years, 5 years, and so on. But we are seeing some experimentation, the solutions that we are looking to a long-term perspective, to a systemic transformation, to a justice-oriented transformation, and so on. So, but of course, challenges, scale, governance, how to improve that. So it's all around what we're seeing nowadays.
Yes, just briefly in compliment to the Gustavo and my experience on leading one technology assessment. The problem is we don't have projects. And when I say no, we have projects, but the small projects is the size of the projects, because that kind of funding is looking for projects for over $10 million. So sometimes we receive a lot of projects, small projects producing biogas for local community, just for $20,000. You have transactional cost, but finally it's so complicated to allocate $20,000. Maybe it's less than $10 million, but that kind of funding is looking for invest $10 million, $5 million, $30 million in projects that you can scale up regionally. For example, suppose that if we propose, I am inventing, I propose sorry for thinking in Chile, in the south of Chile, I don't know, install a biogas plant, bid one, maybe collaborating all companies producing milk, dairy industry working together, and the investment needs $15 million. That project is very attractive because the size of the project is very attractive in order to receive any investors, in order to replicate them in Peru, maybe in Paraguay, maybe in Brazil, or in other regions. So one problem is the size of the projects. All people is thinking in local communities, small projects, because it's cheaper. No, that funding is looking for invest in the big one. Okay. And the second problem is the white elephant. That's happened in Africa. In Africa, we have too many experience that we are investing in a huge plant, but nobody was thinking in transferring capabilities and skills in order when you left and installed one plant there. Finally, it's a white elephant because you never created, for example, capacities or capabilities or training for the people there. Indeed, right now in the North Africa, we have 3 or 4 biogas plants that I remember that kind of projects that right now nobody using because nobody knows how you can produce biogas, for example. So in that case, for one side, investment of the projects, but another side is the capabilities and skills in order to try to invest and keep safe the investment throughout the time. So this is because it's more complicated. And finally, that Gustavo say, restriction, taxes. Suppose that if you're investing, okay, who is dealing? The Minister of the Economy or the Minister of the Environment? Who is managing the project? Who you are allocating the money? For the governors? The Minister or the governors? So is the governance in any countries is completely different. So invest in that kind of project in Chile, Brazil, Argentina is completely different complexity and bureaucracy there. So 2 problems: bureaucracy in order to allocate that funding, and the projects and the size of projects and the capability and the skill that they need in order to keep the safe investment through the time.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your explanations and also for the audience for your questions. We're almost at the end. Before we make the final closure, I would like to take a picture, just a screenshot of everybody that's present here. So I invite you all to unlock your cameras so you can appear on the social media picture of the event. I would really appreciate. Are you guys ready? I mean, all of you feel comfortable sharing your picture, of course. All right, 1, 2, and 3. Perfect. I got our screenshot. Let me save it so we don't lose it. Oh no, it wasn't saved. One more time. I'm sorry, very sorry. 1, 2, and now I got it. Perfect. Thank you very much. And as I mentioned, very last thing we have is, let me share my screen. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is the first of hopefully many activities we are doing to build a community of sustainability research scholars throughout Latin America. Definitely, we will be joining every year at the Academy of Management conference, where we already have another workshop prepared for this. We will have hopefully different activities in the middle, or at least we are building this initial network that we want to strengthen. So we welcome you, if you haven't done it so far, to join the community. We have a QR code there where you can just basically asking you for your name and affiliation. So we can stay in contact whenever we have any activity. You can hear about it. And with that, I would like to just do a big thank you to Alex and Gustavo for your presentations. Thank you to the audience for being here, for your questions. And yeah, I hope you have a great day and forward to seeing you at the next event. So goodbye to everyone.
See you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye. See you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very
Have a nice day.
much.